All right, so I am going to go ahead and get started. So last year we did road mapping in sort of a new way. We had a Google document and we talked through the issues and made a list, and then we moved the items from that list into the projects tab of our GitHub so that we could keep track of our progress. I think that actually worked quite well, so I'm hoping we can repeat that process this year. So Chris has very kindly set up this road mapping document. I believe that the link to it is in the chat. It was also up on the card throughout the lunch break. But anyway, this is an open document, so anyone participating in this can go in there and add stuff. And I believe Chris will be keeping an eye on it and perhaps adding things through the discussion while I lead from up here. So we've pre-populated the document with the things that were on last year's document that didn't get done, a few ideas that have come up in conversation, and perhaps other people have already added things, I don't know. So I'm just going to start scrolling down through it and talking about the issues that are there, but feel free to interrupt me or keep adding things. As always, our project is limited by our capacity to do things, so the two ways to get features added are to ask for them a lot until somebody does it, or to contribute effort, and contributing effort tends to get things done more quickly. So I think our roadmap will be constructed of the things that the most people want that we can prioritize as a project, and then whatever things people are actually willing to do on top of that. That is the VuFind way, and probably the way of most open source projects. So with that out of the way, let's start looking at the category Chris has labeled technical debt, which is the stuff we talked about last year that we didn't actually do. So improved ILS support, we're going to keep working on Folio. I think we need to talk about the priority level of the ILS interface redesign and how to do that. Probably best to get through a quick overview of what we've got here before we get into the weeds of that, but hold that thought.
Jamie, if you double click on that gap between the pages, it'll collapse.
Oh, great, thank you. Simplified spell checking is some work that got done 2 or 3 summits ago, and I never got it contributed back. So we need to track down that code. And if anyone has an implementation of that that they can share with me, please do. And to be more clear, this is Solar added different spell checking features a few releases ago, which might be able to simplify the way we do spell checking in VuFind. So we just need a new spell checking listener that utilizes that new functionality. Two-factor authentication is something we've talked about but haven't had a compelling use case for yet. If you have one, update the JIRA ticket. Improved user customization refers to users being able to set various defaults on an account-by-account basis, like being able to choose their own personal default search order for when they're logged in. There's a whole list of things like that that have JIRA tickets that have not been implemented yet. As a sub-bullet of this, a slightly related but mostly distinct thing is this idea of letting users scan their library card numbers as QR codes, which I think is something that Era had talked about contributing. JavaScript improvements. Convert all JavaScript to object-oriented approach to prevent polluting the global namespace. That's something we've been doing gradually and perhaps should do more systematically. Clean up JavaScript files. Yeah, better organization. Common.js just has a lot of stuff dumped in it. There's this idea of using an external dependency manager to pull in the JavaScript and CSS dependencies that we use. I've started a pull request on that, but there's still a lot more to do. Improved front-end feature modularity. I think this is the idea, again, of splitting VuFind into smaller pieces and making it easier to swap things in and out. Definitely more discussion would be valuable there. Refactoring the facet list to a plugin. Most of that work was completed in 5.0. That was some of the things I talked about as far as making the search homepage configurable instead of having hard-coded facet lists there. But this sub-bullet about decoupling active filters from the facet list still needs to be done. I think that's another National Library of Finland possible contribution. Making the asset pipeline compatible with load balancing is another thing that was discussed that may be specialized, but I haven't heard more about it. So more API support, adding the ability to clear the cache through the API was discussed as a possible low-hanging fruit. Anything else, as the note says, gets complicated pretty quickly. But enriching APIs is still something we could have on the roadmap. Sort of on the in-the-weeds category, adding an extra field for search parameter objects so that custom parameters can be stored in the serialization. That hasn't happened yet, as far as I know, nor has adding more fields to the loan list, collecting sample Solr configurations for large indexes, the extended configurable autocomplete, which again is something that you can see right now at National Library of Finland, but it's not a core feature. I believe Chris has actually gone so far as to add some possible native support for this to the autocomplete library we use, but we're not using it for anything yet. And then geographic updates is kind of a placeholder. I know Leela made a lot of progress on things, but there are probably some items she still wants to do, and perhaps some other people are interested in more geographic stuff. So maybe she can add some notes under there if she has anything to say. And I see that Era has asterisked all the things that are from his list, so thank you for that. Or if he didn't do it, then someone's very accusatory in their treatment of this document.
Yeah, it was me actually, yes. No worries. I'm sorry about that. It seems that I have lost track of a lot of things.
Well, you've done a lot of big things, so we will forgive missing a bunch of small ones.
I'll just blame the Zend framework update.
Yes, yeah, and that's all my fault, so fair enough.
Oh, and GDPR, of course.
Yes, yes. So, are we getting into a fight about Bauer in the comments here?
I just added it for information. I don't have a strong opinion on that, but some have.
Yeah, we can circle back to that conversation, actually. Let me see, is there, what do we have in our ideas for the future? More record drivers for more formats. Yes, that would be good. Indexing. Yes, that would be good. I wonder if making the record manager more visible in general would be valuable. I don't know if a lot of people understand it well or realize that it's an option.
Yeah, I don't really know. But for instance, regarding the EAD format, it's not very simple to index. So you actually need to split the records into smaller pieces as a hierarchy to make it work well in the search, and that's something that gets pretty complicated. So duplicating that, I don't know if it's worth it.
Right, right. I've been through all kinds of back and forth nightmares about how to index EAD effectively, so I understand.
Right, and then you probably also know that there are different ways of doing it and different ways of using EAD. So it's possible that the one solution doesn't fit all.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and when you're aggregating from multiple institutions, it's particularly impossible because you can't make any assumptions at all.
Yeah, that's true. We have several, so we are able to manage, but it's not easy. And then there are different versions. Lately, the EAD 3 version is coming up, and it's a little bit different than the older ones. But I have something for that too. But I think even if it's not perfect, it could be used as a basis for local customizations, especially in VuFind side, but also in Record Manager, you can override functionality and extend it as needed.
Yeah, it's always better to have some kind of working example as opposed to nothing, in my opinion. So it's good to have starting points. So,
I'll put that on my to-do list.
Thank you. So more visualization. Do we have any clarification on what that means? Who is that from?
Yeah, that was just from the discussion that we had over lunch, where there's finding ways to visualize, like bring more visual data to it.
Okay, so that was from the lunch conversation.
Yeah, as are the next two to kind of help facilitate that first bit. Maybe I should condense it. But we were talking about image metadata, maybe pulling that in somehow. I'm not sure if I'm being picked up on the microphone, so a repeat, but like
right.
just an idea for the future, you know.
So yeah, so
working with data sets.
Working with data sets, working with images. So are you saying we want to be able to basically ingest images and then extract the metadata from the images so that you can do an image search in VuFind?
I'm not sure if the actual analysis belongs in VuFind, but the ability to search on that kind of data is something we were talking about. There's a lot of exciting projects that we should be able to utilize about like advanced OCR, and you know, if people want to find something, you know, yeah, ingest tags, things like that. Just wait. So maybe VuFind doesn't do the ingesting, but maybe we can find a way to pull in more sources like that.
Great.
Hey, Chris, this is Leela. What we're doing for one of our databases is that I've got a lookup table that's doing like the image metadata lookup. So it basically looks at the image file name and then does the lookup for the alt tags and the title tags and then serves that out. But maybe adding something to Cover Loader that can ingest that type of data would be awesome.
Sorry. Can I add? We have had multiple requests for searching for the image metadata, such as is it a color image, is it black and white, what's the resolution, and so forth. So that's related at least.
Yeah, that would be helpful, and that would be very easy to add to the index because you could just do custom fields for it if you had the tool to, you know, get you from point A to point B. And I'm sure that a lot of this stuff, just with ImageMagick or even the built-in, what is it? I'm blanking on whatever the PHP built-in image handling stuff is, but it's probably all pretty doable. It would really be a question of what are you indexing where this comes into play? You know, is there a master metadata record that has a reference to an image in it that you then need to extract and pass along, sort of similar to the way that we currently can do full text indexing to certain URLs. You know, is there an image indexing tool that's equivalent to that that we need to set up that can be wired into either SolarMark or the XML ingester or something else? Record Manager obviously being another player.
Yeah, that's true. And it's of course a question of performance also.
Right.
Some of the sources, for instance, are really slow to answer. So it's always a problem if you have to hang on and wait for results from a third party. Another thing that that's related to images and visualization is that some of the different record formats like Lido, they contain a lot of, or at least for us, they have a lot of links to images, large images. And we have this sort of an image pop-up or lightbox for images. So if we get to have more high-resolution images, having a nice built-in way to actually display them would be nice also.
Absolutely. Another thought is that our homegrown digital library instance uses the universal viewer for rendering TripleIF resources. Perhaps there's some way that some of that functionality could be abstracted, though it's not a complicated integration by any means. But
that's the TripleIF has come up with us though we don't have any sources that actually support it yet. But I noticed that there is a plugin for Leaflet also for doing that. So that might be useful.
That would be very useful for us.
Right, right.
How easy do you think it would be to bring our manifest generation code into VuFind?
So yeah, I mean, the thing with TripleIF is there are two pieces to it. There's consuming it and producing it, and we do both here. Consuming it is easy because you just need a URL of the thing you want to display, and then you pass it to a viewer, and it works magically. Creating the actual manifest to describe a resource is hugely complex. Well, it's not complex. It's a matter of building a big document, but it's very implementation specific. And so right now we have an implementation that is very much tied to the details of our particular Fedora instance that nobody else will or should use in the future. It would be interesting to find a way to make that more generic, but I think what we probably need to do is wait until our digital library settles on its new technology stack, and then perhaps that will inspire us to build that out in a generic way that others could use.
Even just having a resolution image viewer plus the ability to analyze the image for different resolution would be great.
So we have a vote from the audience that yes, having a high resolution image viewer and the ability to analyze image data would be great. So there are multiple votes for this functionality.
Could I change the topic and talk about record drivers for a second?
Sure. Do you want to come up so you can speak to the mic, or?
It's not that complicated. All I was going to say is what we would like to be able to do is to somehow link a record driver to facet filters so that when you're filtering by a particular data source, you could get a different facet display than when you're filtering by a different data source. Right now, our facets are fixed. And because we have many different record sources, we have a lot of things that can go into facets. but we have to limit those because otherwise we just have too many facets. Could we link facets, the facet list that's displayed, to a data source or a record driver?
So the question here was, is there a way to dynamically determine which facets are displayed in the facet bar based on a particular record driver? And I think the answer to that exact question is no, but I think there is functionality that might make sense that could do what you need. The reason I say no is that basically the whole point of the record drivers is to allow different things to coexist within the search. And so if you don't know what you're going to get back from the search at the time that you make the search, then you can't rely on what you get back to decide what you request.
Right, well, so my idea was that you link in configuration to a particular filter.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so I think the solution is, as you say, what would be useful is a way of saying, if a certain filter is active, then certain facets are added to the facet list. And I think that is definitely doable. The main question would be how to configure it in such a way that the configuration was not hard to understand or work with. And dealing with INI files, we're fairly limited in what we can accomplish. So it might be a question of whether we need an advanced facet configuration that uses JSON or YAML or some richer thing, or if we're willing to accept some kind of clunky way of doing it. But certainly the bottom line of, if this filter is active, do this, add these facets, that seems reasonable. So did you happen to capture that, Chris?
Sorry, I was checking out Aries.
Oh, no problem. This is actually something that I think I thought about quite a few years ago and never really got around to implementing. So it's worth giving it another thought. So facet list dependent on active filters. Filter X adds facets Y and Z. Hopefully I'll remember what that means when I look at this in a couple days.
I'll help you.
Thank you.
Perhaps also filter X removes facets.
Right. There we go. Oh, and I see Chris is asking what the Finna image viewer is.
It's actually a really good implementation.
Let me check. I don't remember. I'll get back to you shortly.
Thank you. So it seems like we've read this whole document aloud into the stream. So are there any other compelling things that are missing, or do we want to dive deeper into discussing any of these particular items? I certainly am interested in talking a little more about ILS stuff and Bower, but before we do that, I want to be sure we've got all the basic ideas on the table.
I feel like that needs to be a more action item. Are we making it more dependent or making it less dependent?
I think what we want to do is add the ability to configure it to be.
That's that.
That looks good.
Just want to make sure we know like the action is clear.
Yep, that's great. So I'm pretty sure we've got a Jira ticket where we started collecting suggestions for improving the ILS driver interface. And I'm thinking we should probably link that ticket to this document.
ILS driver interface.
Yes.
Is it interface cleanup? Control solar.
I think it's interface cleanup.
Here?
That looks right. It doesn't belong under record drivers, though.
Yeah. Where are we linking it to?
Well, I was, since we're getting a silence here, I thought I would move on to talking briefly about this idea of improving the ILS driver interface. And that is the ticket where some initial conversation has taken place about what needs to happen. And sorry, what was that?
There it goes. I'm like, I typed more than that.
So one of my first questions is, what is the best way to build a specification for what we would like the ILS driver interface to look like? Because I feel like right now we have our wiki spec, which is kind of haphazard and it gets the job done, but barely. And I'm wondering if there's something more formal that we should be using at the specification stage so that we can discuss what we really want to do before we set about doing it. And I haven't reviewed this ticket in a little while, but the really short version is that I think the idea is, let's devise a spec that cleans up some of the messy things about the current ILS drivers. Then let's build a decorator class that will take an existing ILS driver and map it to the new interface so that we don't have to rewrite all of the drivers, especially in cases where we don't have the ability to test them anymore because we no longer have access to the systems they connect with. And then as the final stage, begin revising the drivers where possible to eliminate the need for that decorator class. And the amount of work that will require will depend on how drastic the revisions are. My gut feeling is that for the most part, it won't be that crazy. It will be renaming elements for greater consistency, perhaps changing the structure of a few return values, again, for consistency. Probably some of the biggest changes would be in the area of drivers reporting their specifications, because honestly, that's complete madness right now, and I think we can do better. As I say, the first step is to say what we want and to think it through enough to see, will this really work if we change it? And that's where I'm not sure what the best approach is for creating that initial proposal.
Can you explain a little bit more about what is the pain point you're trying to address?
So the question was, what is the pain point we're trying to address? And the answer is that working with the ILS has a few pain points. One is, if you want to build a new ILS driver, you have to navigate quite a few idiosyncrasies of the interface that has developed over the years, and I think it could be more straightforward. But as I say, in my mind, the biggest pain point is there's a lot of code about, VuFind needs to do function X, so it needs to ask the ILS driver, do you have function X? And then that negotiation takes place in a variety of different ways that aren't consistent, using functions that do different things but have similar names. And every time I get into any of that code, I spend a couple hours just trying to remember what the heck it's supposed to be about. And I think we can do better than that.
I second that. It's always the same. And I'm partially responsible for doing that, for creating that mess.
But the seeds were in place before you watered them.
That's right. But still, I would like to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
But at least the Jira ticket lists some of those things that I would like to see improved. So that's only one way to look at it, of course. And I have no idea how it would be, what would be the best way to actually do it. But I completely agree with what Damien said.
I will do some research into tools, since no one's screaming in joy about anything they've worked with in the past. So we may just have to explore some new territory here. But
is the idea, as far as I can say, the idea is still to keep it completely PHP. So no like adding a REST API on top of a VuFind API module or something.
that is correct. Though I think one of the ideas that was at least floated in pushing this out to an external project is that you could theoretically build an API on top of that could be used in other contexts. But I definitely am not looking to add more layers of indirection in VuFind itself. It seems preferable to keep it close to the way it is, just make it a little more logical.
Yeah, I agree with that, but then we probably need to keep in mind that someone needs something else from the API.
Right.
In a slightly different way.
The other issue is that if you open this up as a RESTful API, you would have to take into account all kinds of security considerations that are not really on the table the way we're currently doing things.
Yeah, that's true. But then you could have it like for some secure access only, like for the approved and kind of reviewed applications can only use it. Or well, we can leave that to the implementer of the RESTful API.
Right. But it's definitely a consideration that would have to go into that design, that if we don't turn it into an API, we don't have to think about yet.
This could also be extended to how the drivers actually work. At some point, I was considering writing some code that would actually reside on the Voyager ILS side and interact with the driver that VuFind includes. But that I think the time has passed for that to happen.
Yes.
So everyone's moving away. So I don't know if there is are there any like other ILSs that would use anything like that, or is it like a dead idea already?
I mean, the other piece here is Dia, Paya, these existing APIs that were designed for generalizing ILS interactions that are now supported by VuFind. I think that was one of the proposals, in fact, for creating an API on top of the VuFind drivers, was to actually create an implementation of Paya that could be both consumed by VuFind and exposed by the VuFind drivers. Though obviously that would not be full featured unless we did a lot more work.
Right. Yeah. That's as far as I know, from what I've looked at those, is that they provide the nice framework, but they're nowhere near as complete as we would need.
Right. And I see Chris is adding a note also that in working on developing the Folio driver, he's been building sort of an abstract base class for API-based ILSs to standardize some of the ways we deal with HTTP interactions and so forth. And it may eventually make sense to refactor things to be more uniform when doing those kinds of things, just so we're not doing solving the same problem in 10 different ways across 10 different drivers, which we currently are.
Yeah, that's also a great thing to do.
So I also wanted to take just a couple moments to talk a little bit more about the external dependency management thing, because I don't have a strong opinion about this, but I just want a way to manage our dependencies better, because right now we have a bunch of files that have been dropped into a bunch of places, and we don't necessarily know where all of them came from or what to change if we want to update something. And so obviously getting that under better control so that we know what versions of what dependencies we have, and if we want to upgrade them, we just change a version number and run a tool and it does the right thing. I think that puts us in much better control, both in terms of knowing what we have and knowing how to get away from where we are. I looked into a variety of tools and didn't find any that I really was happy with, but ended up with Bower Installer as the tool that did what I needed it to do. So Bower itself doesn't do everything, but there's a Bower plugin called Bower Installer, which allows you to create a configuration that not only says which versions of components to install, but where to put the individual files. And so that enabled me to at least begin work on a branch where you can use a tool to install the dependencies and it puts them in the right places without changing a lot of fundamental things about how VuFind operates. It's possible that there's a different tool that does the job better, but perhaps at the cost of requiring us to make more dramatic changes to our current usage of the dependencies. But bottom line, it's confusing because there are so many similar tools with subtle differences, and I haven't had time to dig deeply into it. It does seem that Bower's days are coming to a close, so I'm not a strong advocate for using Bower Installer. But at the same time, if it's the only thing that works right now, it may be better than nothing in terms of allowing us to document our dependencies in a structured way. And if some better tool comes along, hopefully porting from one tool to another tool is not as difficult as coming up with that versioned dependency list in the first place. So I certainly welcome more input there.
Well, I have tried and also failed to do what Bower does with other tools. And well, it doesn't mean that it's not possible, but my concern is that Bower has been deprecated. So it sort of feels weird to start using a tool that's only there to support the existing users. But then again, if it's the best tool for the job, well, why not?
Right, right. But yeah, that's certainly not a road that leads where we need it to go, because presumably newer projects will, if they are not already at that point, stop even bothering to register with Bower, and then Bower won't work, and then we'll be stuck. So it's definitely a valid concern. But it.
Things are jumping around because I'm typing this.
Oh yeah, no problem. Chris is just pointing out that things are jumping on the screen because he's typing, but that's fine.
If you want to see what I outlined.
All right, where?
Up top.
Okay.
There.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So, I mean, perhaps further research on what people are using to replace Bower Installer could point us in the right direction, because that certainly is the most on-target thing I've found. And I have to imagine that if people are using that and are being told that Bower is deprecated, they're going somewhere. So maybe we can follow them.
I suppose it's better to use Power than write our own tool anyway.
Yes, yes, please.
We already have these two things, and maybe we can not add more dependencies.
Yeah, Chris is pointing out that we already have NPM, but I think the problem is that NPM installs things in a node-friendly way, whereas Bower installs like the JavaScript final compiled resources, and that's what we actually need. I don't know if there's as consistent a way to get that out of NPM without having to run bundler on it, or adding more steps and complexity and ending up with files that are different from the distribution packages of the various libraries. But again, I don't claim to have a deep understanding of what I'm talking about in this specific area, so I could be wrong about some of that.
You probably end up adding Webpack, but then that's also superseded by something else, and it's a nightmare.
Dependency management. Do we now spend more time figuring out how to use prepackaged solutions than we used to spend actually solving problems? It's possible.
It's quite possible, yes.
So I see that somebody has put configuration simplification on the roadmap. Do we want to talk about that in more depth? Was that Chris?
I think there was something that came up during your presentation that might be an important thing for the next version.
Yeah, so Chris put it there because I mentioned it during the opening comments, and it is certainly something we can talk about. There are actually a few layers of configuration issues we can talk about. One is there's a pull request that's sort of on hold pending changes to Zend framework that proposed a better way of using native Zend components for configuration management to reduce the amount of homegrown VuFind config loading stuff we have. So that might be worth looking at again. But there's also the actual organization and nature of the configuration itself, because right now we have, of course, config.ini, which is just a big accumulation of miscellaneous stuff, a handful of which probably would fit better in other more specialized configurations that have been subsequently added. And then we have lots and lots of special purpose configuration files. There are definitely some inconsistencies and oddities in there. It ultimately comes down to, it would be disruptive to change this. Is it worth it? And I've thus far largely been on the side of it's not worth it yet, but it does bother me a little bit. So I don't know what the tipping point is, or whether we want to do a few adjustments to take care of the most obvious flaws, but leave most of it as is, or if we would want to undertake a more top-down, let's just redesign this to be the idealized system kind of approach. There's also the question of whether INI files are the best answer. I still actually think they're pretty good because they're so easy to work with, but they also have extremely strict limitations on what you can achieve. The easy stuff is really easy. The hard stuff gets clunky fast, and we certainly have plenty of examples of clunky INI configurations in VuFind. When your configuration string needs more than 2 delimiters, maybe that's a bad sign.
I was wondering if you could simply create a configuration tool that generates INIs.
The question was whether we could have a configuration generation tool. And that is also something I've thought about, but it ultimately comes down to then you have another piece of software you have to maintain every time you change a configuration. So the cost benefit hasn't fallen out in favor of doing that yet. But in an ideal world, it would certainly be nice to have.
It might be possible to do something with the existing files if we just had more strict style of commenting and providing the possible options, like parsing the comments and displaying an editor based on that.
That is a very good point, and that might even be worth investigating further.
I didn't quite understand what he said.
The suggestion was maybe if we standardized all the comments in the INI files, we could write an editor tool that parsed the comments in order to present an interface. I mean, that's still a significant amount of work, but it's more maintainable in the long term, for sure.
Yeah, because that would keep all the stuff in one place at least, and then provide some way of changing it without going to the INI files. Then again, I think the INI files are the most user-friendly file type, since you don't need to worry about indentation or any of the syntax rules of JSON or things like that. So in many cases, they are still the best thing, I think.
Exactly. I mean, YAML drives me crazy with regularity because one misplaced space and the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly, and then if you have to escape some special characters in JSON, it gets pretty ugly too.
Well, and also JSON doesn't support comments. I think if you could comment your JSON file, I would be much more inclined to use that.
Yeah, true.
Hello, Brent. For the moment, because we are getting a lot of noise from your microphone. But maybe we can do some troubleshooting on the break. No, that's not coming through. Sorry. So we have about 25 minutes left for our scheduled session. Are there other areas that people feel strongly that they want to discuss? I mean, there's obviously a lot we could talk about following up on Chris's presentation about what our next steps should be for the user interface. I know there are some strong and potentially incompatible opinions going on there. So at least agreeing on what our next short-term steps should be would be helpful.
Well, just one comment on that. At least please don't get rid of the Bootstrap theme in a single step. Give us a little bit of time to actually manage.
We don't intend to delete the Bootstrap theme, just move beyond it.
Yeah, there's definitely no desire to change everything all at once. That would be a bad idea. The question is how to balance not doing everything all at once with not having to support multiple divergent themes for a long period of time. But I think the first step is to figure out where we want to go, and then we can figure out how to get there, whether that is creating a new theme but continuing to support the old theme for a version, or if we can make small incremental changes to the existing theme that won't hugely disrupt people at upgrade time. It will really depend on what the shape of the changes look like.
That's good to me as well. My only problem is that we currently support hundreds of user interfaces based on the Bootstrap theme. Well, loosely based on this. And it doesn't hurt if it gets simplified to not have such a strong style or anything, but just having it as the base is beneficial for us at least. But we are willing to work on bringing our themes up to date with whatever the base is.
We had a little bit of interference for some of that, but I at least got the tail end.
Oh, I was just saying that we are currently have our theme based on the Bootstrap theme. It's heavily customized, so it wouldn't hurt to simplify the Bootstrap theme also, at least the style of it, if that's of any use. But we are also willing to work on updating what we do based on a new theme if it comes up really nice and really useful for the future. So don't get hung on what I'm saying.
Great. Thank you. So another item that came up in some of the comments when people submitted registrations was incorporating linked data into VuFind in a more useful way, which we've been talking about since the first VuFind Summit in 2010 without really making any substantial progress on, I think because we've lacked a use case. But I do wonder whether there are any noteworthy applications we should look into. Just as a possible example, could we build some recommendation modules or channel providers that make use of linked data in some interesting way to augment things? I'm basically fishing for a real-life use case to prove a concept, which is what we've been lacking thus far.
Well, we are at least in the same situation we have been the last couple of years, that we have some support for linked data, especially thesauri and things like that. So we can do index time augmentation of record data, for instance, with subject terms that are in different languages. But it's still a really small piece of our metadata that has anything that can be used. So it hasn't really moved that quickly. That said, I think somewhere in the nearby future we will get way more metadata, including like URIs or some kind of stuff linked data. So things may change.
Yeah, and I think certainly doing it at index time is going to be more straightforward than doing it at runtime, because typically the stuff isn't fast.
It's true. The problem with doing stuff index time is that if not all the metadata supports that, you end up with functionality that only works with the subset of the records. And for instance, I would really like to have something that replaces something like the author search. When you click on an author name, you would do an ID-based search for the author, or same with the subject headings or topics. But we are not there yet. We can't do that because it's really difficult to tell the user how it works and doesn't work.
Right, right. And also, as you sort of allude to, if you have the identifier, but you also have to dereference the identifier, and the value that goes with that identifier is something that's externally managed, then that is another thing that could potentially change, causing inconsistencies in your system if you're not constantly re-indexing to be sure that you have all of the most up-to-date terms corresponding with your identifiers.
Yeah, I suppose that shouldn't be the case that they're changing, but that's also possible. So we need to cater for that. Then again, there are some things that can be done. For instance, you could do the search by using the identifier with a huge boost, and then the author name as a secondary search option. So you would get the matches that are certainly the correct ones first, and then you would get all the rest anyway.
That's true, but it also poses challenges in areas like faceting. You would probably want to be able to facet on a URI and then find some value to display. I don't know, more things to think about anyway.
Yeah, it's not easy. Faceting is one of the difficult things there in that case.
And as far as the values not generally being supposed to change, I can just say that from my experience of working with a very small, in the grand scheme of things, linked data set with author information derived from the Library of Congress authorities file, things have changed a lot more and a lot more quickly than I would ever have guessed. So it seems volatility should not be underestimated.
I didn't really want to hear that, but thanks for sharing.
Right, I wouldn't have thought that obscure 19th century authors would be a high priority for having their authoritative headings changed frequently, but somebody's doing it.
Oh, well, I suppose that's necessary. So we need to cater for that, yeah.
I don't think that's anything for next year's roadmap, though. I think it's still further out, but we should definitely keep it in mind.
I should mention something about the record drivers that I put up there to contribute. There is always a little bit of work trying to decide what's the best, what are the kind of common things that should be contributed. So it will be a bit of work to try to extract the general driver from what's specific to our implementation. But I'll try to come up with at least something.
Thank you. Yeah, that is always a challenge. But I'll review whatever you share, and if there's stuff that looks special purpose, I can always add lots of questions until you get annoyed and delete it.
Yeah, it's good that you do that, because sometimes there is just fin or something.
Just looking to see if there's anything
Do you guys remember what we talked about modularizing the facets, the side facets or anything? That's sort of related to my latest pull request on the deferred facets.
So my recollection was simply that we had talked about removing the facet list, rather the filter list from side facets, because right now those two things are bound together. But in reality, you might want to display the filter list in a different place from the side facets, or maybe you don't want side facets at all, you only use top facets, but then there's no way to see what filters have been applied. So I think that was the main outstanding thing we talked about last year, was just creating a way to display the filter list without automatically also displaying the side facets, and vice versa.
Right, that was one of the things that I was about to contribute and forgot.
I think that's still worth doing, for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to put that on my list.
Great, thank you.
Oh, it is on my list. Oops.
I feel like everything more to-dos than MRI.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're getting all the to-dos over there.
Sorry, I couldn't hear Chris's comment.
Oh, he just said you seem to be getting more to-dos than we do, so.
Well, yeah, but it's mostly just digging up the code and contributing it, or making it into a PR. But sometimes that's way more work than I would like to, especially when it's been a while and I don't remember what's related to that. And then there have been like a bunch of fixes later on, and it's not just one commit anymore. So that's why it's slower than I would like to.
Right. And then the review process takes even more time, so. But we'll get there. I guess switching gears a little bit, another thing that's worth thinking about is there anything that we really want to see in 5.1 before we switch gears to start working on 6.0? That is, are there non-breaking changes we want to prioritize to get a release out so that we can then focus on breaking changes? Or another way of putting it, do we want to establish a 5.1 release branch so that we can begin making breaking changes to master in parallel with feature additions for 5.1? My feeling is that we are not currently rich in new feature ideas. Almost everything we're talking about is maintenance stuff. And I'm just trying to think ahead to see what is going to be exciting about these releases that we want to tell people about. It's
For our users, the image handling.
I hear image handling as an exciting feature. So.
Maybe you just need to start thinking about it more in the commercial vendor way. You wouldn't believe how big deal was it that the library card barcode was added to a user interface of one of the discovery interfaces. That was a major feature.
Yeah, you definitely never quite know what will be really exciting. I want to be sure that I'm not completely bogged down in addressing behind the scenes pain points that only I care about, and that there are also some things that the front-facing people observe as being worth upgrading for.
I think the depth list at least has some of those features that could be included in 5.1, like some of the improved ILS support things and what else? There was something else too. Well, the barcode of the library card.
Right.
Maybe that side facet thing that I made a pull request of. It's I don't think it was. Well, it depends on if you want to keep all the templates like back compatible, then that would be out of question. But that's actually a question. What kind of changes would you put into 1.5.1?
Yeah, certainly I would prefer to mostly focus on things that are just adding rather than changing, but that's a somewhat flexible line in my mind, depending on how widespread and how significant the changes might be. You know, if one template gets slightly refactored to support a new feature, I could probably live with that. It's not the same as, you know, changing something in a way that impacts dozens of templates. But I will certainly review pull requests with an eye to, does this feel like a 5.1 or a 6.0, and add milestones accordingly, and we can discuss and debate as needed if others feel differently about it. I am feeling like there's just not a really big pile of 5.1 issues right now, so it may be possible to get 5.1 finished, say, early in the new year, so that we can focus for a good six months or more on the 6.0 features, to have another solid summer major release as we've been doing in the past few years. The other big thing that I've mentioned on the developers call, and it's still high on my list, is getting SolarMark so that it works with Java 10, because right now we're not running well in a Java 10 environment. Well, we're running just fine. You can't index anything. So it seems that problem is solved, but I'm just waiting for the fix to get put into an official release so I can incorporate it into VuFind. But that will be a major driving force for VuFind 5.1. I'm not going to release 5.1 without that problem being solved, because I think it's important enough to wait. And I'll just keep nagging as much as I can to hopefully get that to happen.
I think it's also worth bearing in mind that 5.1 is a point release, so it doesn't have to be huge.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yes.
At least I feel that a 0.1 release is more of a maintenance release than a new feature thing.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but historically our point releases have at least had a couple noteworthy things in them, and I don't think this will be an exception. We already have a few items in the changelog, but it just doesn't feel like overall we have as big of a list this year as we have in the past, and that may be a good thing because we all have other things we need to do too, but I just want to be sure we're not missing anything. So I have 3 minutes left according to my clock. Anyone else have anything to add?
I threw on Polygon search and storage, if I can get to it. But that would be like a 6.0, I think, release. That's what I'm thinking for that.
Yeah, that would be nice. I mean, another issue that I don't think we've talked about at all this year, but that comes up is, what are the new Solar features that we're not taking advantage of? Because I don't think we've really done a close look at what is new in Solar in quite some time, and there are probably things we could be taking advantage of that we aren't using yet, and possibly things we could simplify or adjust accordingly. So I welcome any thoughts on that now or later.
Question. What was the situation with the default index or the schema of VuFind Solar default regarding doc values?
We basically discussed and ran tests and came to no particular conclusions and didn't change anything. I don't think anyone has had a solid enough understanding of the significance to make a decision on that, but it's certainly not a closed conversation. It's just we didn't reach a conclusion and didn't find a problem that specifically needed solving, so we aimed for the status quo.
Okay, there is something that that we should probably discuss, because I found that doc values are really, really important, especially when the index size grows.
So I guess the question I've never been able to get a satisfactory answer to is, what is the downside of doc values? Because if we just want to turn them on so that people can benefit from them, that seems like an easy enough proposition, as long as there's not some gotcha that, oh, but if you turn them on, X will happen.
I think the most important downside is that they can be ever so slightly slower than the old filter cache way of doing things, especially with faceting. So there may be a small performance hit when doing faceting, but it will be really beneficial because there won't be a huge need to do warming up anymore. So commits or changes to the index are cheaper, much cheaper. Another thing is that you need a lot less heap in Java when you run doc values. So you don't put stuff into the filter cache anymore, and that makes the whole memory usage completely different. So you may need to adjust a little bit, because the file system cache is much more important in that case.
That makes sense. So I think maybe we should revisit the conversation from the last time we did this, because I feel like we did a bunch of tests and they were somewhat inconclusive, and maybe we didn't do the right tests, or maybe my memory is failing and they were more conclusive than I recall. But certainly it would be useful to have some data on, if we change this, it's this much slower in this situation, etc.
You should also probably want to run the tests with Solar 7.5, because there have been like multiple fixes on things in the later versions. I don't remember which ones made it to 7.3, but at least I think the last tests were made with 6 point something or 5 point something, and things were completely different there.
That is very true, and that's also something we should think about for 6.0, is upgrading to the latest Solar, because we're not on 7.5 right now, we're on 7.3, and we might as well get up to date, barring catastrophic reasons not to.
We are now running 7.5 in production, and it seems to be one of the better releases. So far, I haven't had any trouble.
Great. That's good to hear. Did you capture any of that, Chris?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And that gets us to the next break. So thank you, and of course we'll leave this document open for a while, so feel free to add late additions or comments, and we'll sort of make sense of it and turn it into a project board probably after the next developers call, so we have a little time to digest everything.